Good morning. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Budharma. I'm from State Polytechnic of Bali, Indonesia. I would like to extend my gratitude and appreciation to the Committee of the International Scientific and Practical Conference, Modern Mechanism of Transformation of Society, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And also, I would like to appreciate and extend my gratitude to the Financial University, Russia, for your strong commitment, for your strong collaboration with Polytechnic Negeri Bali. And I hope in the future we can organize international conference together, either in Russia or in Bali, Indonesia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share my research entitled Global Tourism Resilient Framework Post COVID-19 Pandemic. This is a literature research examining the document from the UNWTO and also from WTTC. So all of this document will be a framework for all tourism policy globally. We need to understand first what is resilient. The word resilient comes from the Latin language resilientum, which means to bloom again or to return to its original state. Figuratively, this word also means to raise again from difficulties. So when we are talking about resilient, we are talking about rebounding actually. We are talking about a state of a company, especially tourism company, after a big disaster, after a catastrophe, they can rebound, they can become stronger and can fight against the disaster in the future. And then resilient theory is strongly adopted and associated with the responsibilities and commitment of all relevant stakeholders in an effort to revive tourism from disaster and is able to adapt to a new normal and carry out transformation to anticipate future disaster or threat. So this theory adopted in some tourism researchers now, especially globally, because we know that tourism is a fragile business, very easily affected by catastrophe or disaster, and the business might collapse. So that is why now global tourism start thinking how to make tourism become more resilient, become tough, and able to fight or to adapt to respond bad situation in this context could be disaster, could be natural disaster, could be political issue, could be terrorism, could be disease like pandemic or epidemic. So all of this become a big issue that might attack or that might uh, creating a big trouble for the business of tourism globally. Well, resilience means rising from adversity and being able to adapt in the same situation. So when we are talking about resilience is divided into four dimensions. The dimension of resistance. So how then tourism may resist the disaster. And then the second dimension is revival. After the disaster, how then tourism able to revive and adapt to the new situation. And of course, we are talking about transformation in facing future threat. So this is actually the spirit of the resilient theory. We cannot avoid disaster. Disaster may happen beyond the control of human being. But those disasters could be anticipated by using resilient strategy to make the tourism business more resistant, able to revive, can be adaptable to the new situation, and could be transformed to anticipate or to respond the future threat. So this is actually what we are talking about in this context of tourism resilient strategy. Then there is a question about what is the difference between sustainability and resilience. When we are talking about sustainability, is related to change how the tourism industry is able to survive and have a positive impact on the environment, social culture, and the welfare of community where the company operates. While resilient is a construct of a company's ability to adapt to situation and the environment. How can the tourism industry adapt to circumstances so that it is tough and strong, able to quickly rise and recover from the disaster? When we are talking about tourism resilience strategy, we are talking about transformative changes. So UNWTO developed a system to anticipate tourism in 2030s. They are developing what they call equitable, resilient, and sustainable future. So equitable means that we have to involve all stakeholders, communities, investors, business owners, regulators. So all of those have to join, including, of course, academician, have to do some research how to make tourism more resilient. So we are not talking about status quo because status quo after the disaster, when we are reaching the discovery or recovery, sorry, when we are reaching the recovery, then the business as usual. When the business as usual, when the future threat comes, then the business will collapse again. So this is the spirit of the new normal and when tourism back as usual. So when the recovery is reached, tourism stakeholders have to develop transformative changes for the tourism equitable, resilient, and sustainable future. While tourism back as usual, when the recovery is reached, tourism stakeholders manage tourism as usual, and when the other disaster comes, it will collapse again. When we are talking about tourism resilience strategy, we are talking about 5 steps. The first one, how we can understand the risk of the disaster. So we need to identify the possible disaster on tourism sectors, identify the priority or the most critical aspect that might happen when the disaster strike the company. And then the second one is we have to develop a strategic plan and we need to develop what we call scale of priority. So when we identify the risk, then we try to plan. This strategic planning will be focusing on the survival of the people, like focus on people. After that, we are focusing on a certain priority. What is our priority? The first priority, the second priority, the third priority, and so on. So that's become a strategic planning of the management of a company in tourism. And then the third is mitigation and preparedness. So how we can mitigate, how we can minimize the impact of the disaster, and the question is, are we prepared when the disaster comes? Yeah. So this first, second, and third step is very important step before the disaster comes. But when the disaster strikes, then we need to develop a response strategy. So the response and recovery, we start asking ourselves how we in tourism respond the disaster and how to develop inclusive recovering strategy. So we try to work together. We work hand in hand with all stakeholders to see a better future of tourism. So the recovery is not only the government or the regulator strategy, but recovery is the result of all stakeholders involved in tourism. And after the recovery reach, then important step is the long-term resilient action. So you need to think about what we have to do to make tourism sustainable. So to develop elastic adaptive and transformative long-term resilience strategy is an important step for tourism business or tourism company, tourism sectors to take. Because if we are stuck only on the level of recovery, then the business will be back to normal. And when the future disaster strike, the business will be collapsed again. So the idea of the tourism resilience strategy is how then tourism integrated with other sectors. For example, tourism integrated with uh, farming. So we have uh, agrotourism, we have agri-tourism, and maybe we have marine tourism, we have cultural tourism. So all of those traditional sectors is embedded in tourism. Why? Because when tourism collapses, people still can live on the traditional sectors. Well, we can conclude that the global strategy of the tourism resilience is to renew political commitment to support tourism as a driver of a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And the next one is how then we can strengthen the dialogue among government, the private sectors, local communities, and other stakeholders on opportunities for transforming the sector while rebuilding from the effect of pandemic. So we learn a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic. From there, we try to develop tourism more resilient, more efficient, and more effective, and becoming a strong economic machine or becoming generator for the future of people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, so I would like to thank you for your participation, for listening to my explanation, and please forgive me if I made some mistake or something not convenient for you. Once again, thank you very much, and hopefully this conference will be successful and giving a strong impact for the community, especially community of Russia and also the global community. Thank you very much and have a nice day.